Emily worked at a small diner on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was cozy. The floors were worn, the tables a little wobbly, and the coffee always too strong. But people came for the food and stayed for the warmth. That warmth mostly came from Emily. She wasn't rich or famous, but she had a big heart. Even when customers were rude or the day felt endless, Emily smiled. She believed everyone deserved kindness, no matter who they were. One cold afternoon, the diner was quiet. Most of the booths were empty, and Emily spent her time wiping down tables and refilling salt shakers. Outside, the wind howled, and leaves tumbled across the cracked parking lot. That's when she saw him. An older man stood near the window, his thin frame wrapped in a patched-up coat. His face was lined with age, and his hands shook as he clutched a backpack. He looked lost, like he didn't belong there or anywhere. After a moment, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The bell above it jingled softly. "Can I help you?" Emily asked, her voice gentle. The man hesitated, looking around nervously. I just wanted to get out of the cold," he admitted, his voice shaky. Emily nodded. "Of course. Have a seat." He slid into a booth by the window, keeping his head low. Emily could tell he didn't have money for a meal, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she grabbed a menu and handed it to him. "Take your time," she said with a smile. A few minutes later, Emily brought him a plate of hot soup and bread. "This is on me," she said before he could protest. The man blinked, surprised. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Emily simply nodded. Everyone needs a little warmth now and then. What she didn't know was that her small act of kindness would change everything. For both of them. The elderly man, who introduced himself as Ben, ate slowly, savoring every spoonful of the warm soup. Emily kept an eye on him from behind the counter, making sure he felt comfortable. "You didn't have to do this," Ben said softly when she stopped by to refill his water glass. "But I'm grateful." "It's no trouble," Emily replied with a smile. "Everyone deserves a good meal." When Ben finished eating, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of crumpled bills. His hands trembled as he tried to count them. I want to pay," he said, his voice tinged with embarrassment. Emily shook her head firmly. "Don't worry about it. Really." "But," Ben hesitated, looking down at the table. "I don't like taking charity." "It's not charity," Emily said kindly. "It's just kindness. No strings attached." Ben nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're a good person," he murmured. Before Emily could respond, the door to the diner swung open. Her boss, Mr. Harris, walked in, his usual scowl etched deep into his face. He glanced around the room, his gaze landing on Ben sitting alone in the booth. "Who's that?" Mr. Harris asked sharply, nodding toward Ben. "He came in for a meal," Emily explained quickly. "I covered it." Mr. Harris's eyes narrowed. "You charged it to your tips?" "Yes," Emily admitted. "He needed help." "This isn't a charity," Mr. Harris snapped, his voice rising. "We're running a business here, not handing out free food." "It wasn't free," Emily shot back, trying to stay calm. "I paid for it myself." "Well, that's theft," Mr. Harris barked. "You took money meant for the register and gave it away." "That's not true," Emily protested. "I used my own earnings." "I don't care what you used," Mr. Harris interrupted coldly. "You broke the rules, and I can't have employees doing whatever they want." Before Emily could argue further, Mr. Harris pointed toward the door. "Go clean out your locker. You're fired." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. Fired? For helping someone? But I didn't do anything wrong," Emily stammered, her voice shaking. "You disobeyed me," Mr. Harris said firmly. "That's all that matters." Tears pricked Emily's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of Mr. Harris or anyone else. She turned to Ben, who looked horrified. "I'm so sorry," Ben whispered. "This is my fault." "No, it's not," Emily said gently. "You didn't ask for this. I made my choice." With a heavy heart, Emily grabbed her apron and headed to the back of the diner. As she packed her things, she couldn't believe how quickly everything had fallen apart, all because she'd tried to be kind. Little did she know, her act of generosity was about to set off a chain reaction she never could have imagined. Emily stuffed her belongings into a small bag, her hands trembling as she tried to hold back tears. The locker slammed shut with a loud clang, echoing through the quiet break room. She felt numb, like the ground had been ripped out from under her feet. As she walked back through the diner, Mr. Harris avoided her gaze, pretending to check receipts at the register. A few customers glanced up, their expressions sympathetic, but no one said anything. Ben was still sitting in the booth by the window. When Emily approached, he stood up quickly, his face lined with guilt and sorrow. "I'm so sorry," he said again, his voice cracking. "This is all my fault." "It's not your fault," Emily replied firmly, forcing a small smile. "You didn't ask for this. I made my choice, and I'd do it again if I had to. But now you've lost everything," Ben whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. "Not everything," Emily said softly. "I still have my dignity, and knowing I did the right thing. That means something." Before Ben could respond, Emily turned and headed for the door. The cold wind hit her face as she stepped outside, snapping her back to reality. How would she pay rent? What about groceries? She trudged toward the bus stop, clutching her bag tightly. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that made loneliness feel heavier. But just as she reached the corner, something unexpected happened. A sleek black car pulled up beside her, its engine purring softly. The window rolled down, revealing a well-dressed man in his 50s with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. "Are you Emily?" the man asked, his tone polite but urgent. "Yes," Emily replied cautiously. "Who are you?" "My name is Richard," the man said, smiling warmly. "I'm Ben's brother." Emily froze, shocked. "Brother?" "Yes," Richard nodded. "Ben called me after leaving the diner. He told me what you did for him, and how you lost your job because of it." Emily shook her head, overwhelmed. "It's fine, really. I didn't expect anything in return." "Well, you deserve more than fine," Richard said firmly. "Please let me give you a ride. We need to talk." Before Emily could protest, Richard stepped out of the car and opened the passenger door for her. Hesitant but curious, she climbed inside. Little did she know, this conversation would change her life forever. The car smelled faintly of leather and polish, a stark contrast to the worn diner Emily had just left behind. She sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her hands gripping the edges of her bag, as Richard drove them toward a quiet park nearby. "Ben told me everything," Richard began, his voice calm but filled with emotion, "about how you fed him when no one else would, and how you lost your job because of it." Emily shrugged, trying to downplay her actions. "I didn't do anything special. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Richard said firmly, glancing at her briefly before focusing back on the road. "Not everyone would have done what you did. Most people look away, too busy or too afraid to help. But you saw my brother as a human being. And that's rare." Emily didn't know what to say. She stared out the window, watching the trees blur past. When they reached the park, Richard parked the car and turned to face her fully. "Let me tell you something about Ben," he continued. "He's struggled for years, losing his home, his health, his sense of purpose. But today, thanks to you, he felt seen again. You gave him more than a meal. You gave him hope." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. "I'm glad I could help," she murmured. "But I don't need anything in return." "That's exactly why I want to help you," Richard said with a smile. "People like you remind me there's still goodness in this world, and goodness deserves to be rewarded." Before Emily could protest further, Richard pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, hesitating to take it. "Just a small token of gratitude," Richard replied. "Please, open it." Inside the envelope was a check, for far more money than Emily had ever seen in her life. Her breath caught in her throat. "I can't accept this," she said immediately. holding the envelope back out to him. "Yes, you can," Richard insisted. "Think of it as repayment for your kindness, and maybe a little cushion while you figure out your next steps." "But," Emily stammered, shaking her head, "this is too much." "It's not nearly enough," Richard countered gently. "You stood by your principles even when it cost you everything. That kind of courage should be celebrated, not punished." Emily finally relented, clutching the envelope tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Richard nodded, satisfied. "There's one more thing. I happen to know some people, good people, who'd love to hire someone with your work ethic and heart. If you're interested, I'll make some calls." Emily blinked, stunned. "Why are you doing all this for me?" "Because the world needs more people like you," Richard said simply. "And because Ben is my brother and family matters." As they drove back to drop Emily off, she realized something profound. Sometimes, kindness doesn't just change others' lives. It changes your own in ways you never expect. The next morning, Emily woke up feeling like she'd stepped into a dream. The envelope Richard had given her sat on the kitchen counter, its contents still surreal to her. She hadn't touched the check yet. It felt too precious, almost sacred. But Richard wasn't done helping. Later that day, he called her with exciting news. He'd arranged an interview for her at a local catering company owned by one of his friends. "They're looking for someone reliable and compassionate," Richard explained over the phone. "I told them about you, and they're eager to meet you." Emily hesitated. "Are you sure they'll want me? I've only ever worked in diners." "Trust me," Richard said firmly. "You'll be perfect. Just be yourself." The interview went better than Emily could have imagined. The owner of the catering company, Lisa, was warm and welcoming. After hearing Emily's story and learning about her glowing recommendation from Richard, Lisa offered her a position on the spot. "This is exactly the kind of person we need on our team," Lisa said with a smile. "Someone who cares as much about people as they do about food." Meanwhile, news of Mr. Harris's cruelty began spreading through town. A few customers who had witnessed Emily's firing posted about it online, sparking outrage. Comments poured in criticizing the diner's management. "What kind of place punishes kindness? I'll never eat there again. Emily deserves better than that greedy boss." Within days, the diner saw a sharp drop in business. Customers boycotted, leaving poor reviews and sharing Emily's story far and wide. Mr. Harris tried to defend himself, claiming he was just following policy. But no one was buying it. Feeling the pressure, Mr. Harris attempted to reach out to Emily, offering to reinstate her job. But Emily politely declined. She didn't want to go back to a place where compassion was treated as a crime. Instead, she focused on her new role at the catering company. It was different from the diner. Quieter, more structured, but Emily thrived. Her coworkers admired her work ethic, and Lisa praised her ability to connect with clients. Richard stayed in touch, checking in regularly to see how she was settling in. He also revealed that he'd started sponsoring programs to help homeless individuals like Ben, inspired by Emily's act of kindness. "You've made such a difference, not just for Ben, but for me too," Richard told her during one of their calls. "Thank you for reminding me what truly matters." For the first time in weeks, Emily felt hopeful. She had lost her job, yes, but she had gained so much more. Stability, purpose, and proof that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward and change lives. As weeks turned into months, Emily settled into her new life with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The catering job was everything she'd hoped for, and more. She loved creating meals that brought people together, whether it was a wedding, a birthday party, or a community event. Her coworkers became like family, always ready to lend a hand or share a laugh. One evening, after a long day of preparing food for a charity gala, Lisa approached Emily with a proud smile. "You've been doing amazing work," she said warmly. "I think it's time we talked about promoting you." Emily blinked, surprised. "Promoting me? To what?" "To team lead," Lisa replied. "You've got the skills, the heart, and the respect of everyone here. It's only fair." Emily accepted the promotion humbly, knowing it wasn't just her talent that had gotten her there. It was the support of people who believed in her. Meanwhile, Richard continued his efforts to help those in need. Inspired by Emily's compassion, he launched a foundation dedicated to providing meals and resources for homeless individuals. He named it the Kindness Project, honoring the woman who had sparked its creation. At one of the foundation's first events, a free community dinner, Emily volunteered to help serve food. When she saw Ben among the volunteers, her heart swelled. "Hey, stranger," she teased gently as she handed him a tray of sandwiches. Ben grinned, looking healthier and happier than she'd ever seen him. "Thanks to you, I'm back on my feet," he said. "And now I get to pay it forward." Watching the crowd gather and share a meal reminded Emily why she'd chosen this path. To make the world a little brighter, one act of kindness at a time. Later that night, as she cleaned up, Richard joined her. "You've inspired so many people, Emily," he said, "including me." "I didn't do anything special," she replied softly. "You did something extraordinary," Richard corrected. "You showed us all that even in tough times, kindness matters. And because of you, lives are changing, including yours." Emily smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She had started with just a plate of soup and ended up sparking a movement. Life wasn't perfect. Emily still faced challenges, like anyone else, but she no longer felt weighed down by fear or doubt. Every morning, she woke up excited to see what the day would bring. One sunny afternoon, she visited the park where Richard had first spoken to her. Sitting on a bench, she watched children play and couples stroll by. For a moment, she thought about how far she'd come since that cold day outside the diner. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Remember, kindness always comes back around. Keep shining, Emily." She smiled, tucking the phone back into her pocket. That evening, Emily wrote in her journal, a habit she'd picked up recently. She reflected on everything that had happened. Losing her job, meeting Richard, finding a new purpose. "Sometimes, life throws you curveballs," she wrote. "But if you stay true to yourself, if you choose kindness even when it's hard, you'll find your way. And maybe, just maybe, you'll inspire others to do the same." Emily closed the journal, feeling content. She knew her journey wasn't over. There would always be more people to help, more stories to write. But for now, she was exactly where she needed to be. Because sometimes, feeding one person isn't just an act of generosity. It's the start of something bigger than you ever imagined. And that's the end of the waitress, the elderly man, and the stranger. Glowing star, we hope you enjoyed this heartwarming tale of kindness, courage, and the ripple effects of doing what's right, even when it's hard. Stories like Emily's remind us that even the smallest acts of compassion can lead to extraordinary outcomes. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What did you think of the story? Did it inspire you or touch your heart in any way? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear about your corner of the globe. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt tales. Lastly, if you have a moment, drop a comment below. Tell us, Sparkles, what was your favorite part of the story? Sparkles, has there ever been a time when someone's kindness made a difference in your life? Thank you so much for joining us on this journey with Emily, Ben, and Richard. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep spreading positivity wherever you go. The world needs more people like you.